this session. And this paper is about smart contracts, but what I mean by smart contracts has somewhat similar meaning to what it means in the kind of digital ledger technology or blockchain context, where we can think of smart contracts simply as some programmable rules. But like the question about smart contracts that I'm asking in this paper is slightly different in a sense that I'm asking that, like, in the presence of new technologies that are changing the frictions that exist, like, does it make sense to have like different external financing contracts? And like, if it does, and like, would these contracts benefit from kind of adjusting to data in oncoming basis? So to give a background, so question, classical one in finance is that we would ideally want all profitable projects to be able to get external financing. But of course, the real world is affected by numerous frictions. And one of the main ones in classical traditional world is the fact that we need to monitor. So like when I'm lending to some money to somebody I don't know, and they are telling that like I earn that much, like somebody needs to check, otherwise they will always tell that they made nothing, or at least understate what they mean. Okay. Another one is that like it is difficult to enforce contracts, so somebody might renegotiate later on. I can lend money to somebody and they might not feel like repaying to me. Or there is like moral hazard, which is making that maybe they don't try hard enough in order to sell things. And in this environment, and we know well that like the most typical financing contracts that is prevailing in traditional world are debt contracts. And that is for good reasons. It is because it minimizes these monitoring costs, and I'm going to be more specific on it with some examples. And the main question, like in this paper, is that now that we have like at least technologically new digital ledger technologies available, including blockchain, but by no means I mean here that it needs to be something that is permissionless. What I mean it is that we have like technologies available where in principle we could record all sorts of transactions, like in the case of firms or individuals, everything they earn in some sort of immutable ledger. And in this context, you can imagine that like this need to monitor and like have costly verification is potentially a lot smaller. So the key questions this paper aims to ask is that when we have this environment with different possibilities, should we rethink about like optimal contracts for external financing? And maybe the traditional frictions are like reduced, but maybe there are new frictions that are present here. And what does it imply? So this is a question: how would the optimal contracts look like in this environment? So this one I already told that effectively the premise of this paper is to take some digital ledger technology as given, and we'll have like data that is stored there in a way that we cannot easily rewrite history. And that is a good thing because like this is enabling to overcome two financing frictions. One is like this need to monitor and have verification cost. And second, we can also write contracts in a kind of classical way of thinking of smart contracts that are self-enforcing, so that after I have made a promise, like I cannot renegotiate the promise anymore because it's automatically pre-programmed, and it's gonna makes renegotiation impossible. Okay, and then in terms of like realism on it, we know that actually like in the existing blockchain, like a lot of lending is kind of opposite to what we would ideally want to happen in the frictionless world. We would want, as I said, all investment worthy projects to get financed, even by individuals or firms that don't have any own funds, cannot put down any collateral. Of course, in the actual blockchain, as DeFi lending is not only requiring collateral, but even over-collateralized. There are like obvious reasons for it. It is because the pseudonymous, as a permissionless blockchains tend to be pseudonymous. So effectively, if I don't know whom I'm lending, and there is no way they can necessarily guarantee to me that whatever they are selling is going to actually end up in the blockchain. We have a problem, but again, like technologically, these sort of things are solvable. So like what is it called effectively is oracle problems. That is how to get the real world data into some digital ledger. So one way this could happen is that if you are like thinking of some cryptocurrency or CBDC or something like that being widely used, maybe that is taking a little bit of time. We cannot use like this sort of contracts already for projects that generate the revenues on chain, so we don't need to worry that somebody needs to get the data from real world there. And finally, this possibility is not limited necessarily to blockchain and digital ledger type of technology. So already in the context of, for example, Amazon and many other companies that are useful for firms to make their sales, what is quite popular is that they are offering so-called revenue or profit sharing contracts. Because in this case, like it is in the interest of the firm not to hide the revenues from Amazon, because I mean, at the extreme, it can't sell without Amazon. And in which case, Amazon can offer them contracts because they will see all the verifiable records. So this is the idea, little bit futuristic, but partially related to the things that are already happening. And as I said, the main question I ask, would the optimal contract, how would the optimal contract look like in this environment? What would it make sense that this contract is not only smart in a sense of being pre-programmable, but also adjusting in continuous basis on incoming data? That is why I have like this smart highlighted differently. And classically, we also like have some results in finance which would be telling that it's kind of fine to contract on aggregates. So that is what, like, again, traditional world contracts most of the time look like. Usually when you have a loan or an equity, like, I mean, you get paid like based on like yearly revenues or something. Would it make sense? And again, it's technologically possible that instead of having the transactions in big chunks, we are gonna like make payments maybe on monthly, weekly, daily basis or something that is more frequent. So this is like kind of the things that one can consider here. And second, like a frictions that might be potentially increasing is that, well, there was previous session on AI. So we have increasingly more data available. We can potentially learn from data faster as well. So what happens to these optimal contracts when somebody can learn from data about future prospects more frequently and adjust their effort decisions accordingly. Okay. So the aim is to derive an optimal contract and have some comments about what happens to debt or equity, which are traditional contracts in this environment. So in the full model, I'm gonna later on have like some slides with mathematical details as well, which I'm gonna probably skip, but like I want to just give you the main intuition of the setting. So the setting assumes that there is a firm which has some investment opportunity at date 0. And then it has like bunch of periods where like there is like some individuals who might demand like the firm's product. What I'm taking as given that like what determines about demand is depending on the consumer's preferences. So what I can do as a firm, I can either try to sell them, which costs me potentially some effort, or I can shirk and like not sell them, but I cannot fully control like this demand, but these demand opportunities are there. Okay, as I was telling before, traditional contracts usually are based on aggregates, so we are like having all these sales outcomes. Somebody does accounting based on these overall revenues at the end. We are making some payments between the investors and the firm. And in the traditional world, costly auditing is needed for the reasons that I was telling before. So we can't rely on self-reporting, and necessarily everybody would understate what they have. So suppose that is not a problem, the fact that we have like some audited sales records. But again, in a traditional world, so the sort of things that I was telling before, maybe we want to contract on ongoing basis instead of just at the end. Again, that is something that hasn't been possible in traditional world. It would be just like way too tedious. But again, technologically, if you have all the records in some digital ledger, we could just as well do it. However, like this world is not like frictionless because first of all, in order to make these sales, like the firm would potentially still need to make some effort on continuous basis. Okay, and like we cannot make this human effort completely like verifiable. So there is remaining something that is not contractable. So everything that like can be represented based on cash flows. If you have some fixed cost, variable costs, we could put there. That is not a problem. But if somebody needs to make some costs that we can't contract on an ongoing basis, then we cannot eliminate these frictions. And in the meantime, like imagine that like this frequencies that we are learning and deciding whether to continue or not is gonna get like potentially faster. Okay, so let me illustrate like things using this numerical example, which is going to describe the main friction and why things like are completely in opposite direction compared to traditional world when we have these technologies possible. Consider this kind of simple situation. We have like a period 0. There is some investment that is costing $500 with some probability in first period, like with 50% probability, if we keep it simple. Either there is going to be a lucky outcome, the firm is having demand, otherwise it is not going to have demand. And then like importantly conditional on this, like depending on what happened in the first period, then if things went well, let's assume that it's going to be increasingly likely that things are going to go well. So like after we have made 1,000 sales, the fact that we are going to make a second 1,000 sale is going to go up. So it is 75%, it was 50 here. And with some probability, we are not going to make anything. With this case like here, if you have been unlucky in the first period, so there was no demand, suppose again that, oh actually here is a slight typo, it should be the other way around, so it should be 25 here and 75 here. What I want to have is that when we have been unlucky again, like it is increasingly more likely that we are going to continue to be unlucky. So if you are just like forgetting all like these things, then lumping things to the very end, like it is just like a simple corporate finance situation here where there are like some probabilities that like the firm makes overall $0, $1,000, $2,000. And overall, because it is all symmetric, the present value of this is 1,000. It costs to make investment 500. We would want to make this investment. And if we would not have any frictions, and we know from Modigliani-Miller that like many contracts are equivalent. So, for example, unsecured debt, where investors would have a claim for 880, and the enterprise keeps the rest. Is something that would give in expectations 550 to investors, 450 to entrepreneur. Even more obvious to see a simple equity where investors have 55% equity share and entrepreneur has 45% equity share. Again, it would be exactly the same payoffs for both parties. And I'm having here like an alternative contract where the investors will get 400 if the outcome is 1,000, and like they get 1,200 if the outcome is 2,000 as like an additional example that will turn out to be relevant. Okay, so in a kind of Modigliani-Miller world, it would be possible to have many equivalent contracts. But of course, the classical world is not frictionless, and the primary friction probably has been the costly auditing So for example here, that if we can't trust the firm to self-declare what happened, whether they earned after this due period 0, 1,000 or 2,000, then we need to audit them. Auditing costs like 100 as an example. And in this environment, that is a best contract because we need to audit the firm only in the case that it reports it did nothing. Because we don't really care about whether it made 1,000 or it made 2,000, because in both cases it is going to be perfectly capable of repaying the debt. While with other two contracts, because what investors get depend on whether it's 1,000 or 2,000, then we need to audit the firm in both cases, and one can easily calculate here that NPV under debt is positive, so debt financing is positive possible in this environment, while under the other contracts we will get negative NPV, so the firm would not be able to finance its project if debt is not there. In contrast, when we don't have the verification problem, but what is costly is a continued efforts and things turn completely the other way around. Okay, assume that in this case, it is a decision in period 1 that the firm can make whether to continue or not continue. Okay, so when it has made 1,000, it's going to be relatively optimistic. We'll want to continue. We don't need to incentivize them that much. But if the firm has been unlucky and made 0, again, this probability should be 25 here and 75 here. The firm is more pessimistic, so we need to incentivize the firm in this case as well. And why debt is a worst contract in this environment is the fact that even from ex-ante perspective, all these contracts could be equivalent, but after I have been unlucky, pretty much everything that I make is going to go to the investors. At maximum, I can keep 120 here, and furthermore, the fact that I'm going to make this 1,000 sales in the second period is now not particularly likely as well. So if it is sufficiently costly for me to make an effort, I will quit. So I will effectively make an effort at the first period, but then if I end up here, I will stop under the debt contract. Bit of the same problem with the equity. Not as dramatic, because with equity, I'm going to keep a bigger share, but it's still not an ideal scenario because equity is still a little bit overcompensating the entrepreneur in the case where they have been lucky and asking too much from them in the case they have been lucky. And indeed, in this case, it turns out that the optimal contract is what I called the alternative contract before, which exactly depends and benefits from being conditioned on the first period outcome. Okay, so we actually would want a contract that is not fixing the shares, but it's going to give a bigger share for a firm that has been unlucky in the first period in a second period, because we want to continue incentivizing them to want to make effort, which is better for the ex-ante perspective. And because they are reasonably optimistic in this case, after they have made a good sale, we don't need to give them that much in the case they have been lucky. So overall, this alternative contract is the one that turns out to be optimal, and this contract can be represented in what I can call a dynamically adjusting profit sharing rules, that after every period we are going to split the funds between investors and the firms, and what fractions the entrepreneur keeps and what fractions the investor gets is changing over time depending on the past sales. Again, something that can be programmed, but it's also smart in a sense of reacting to incoming information. Okay? So these are the key findings that overall we can express the optimal contract as this profit sharing rule in most circumstances when we have some meaningful learning from the data, unless we are in the IID world where it doesn't matter. The past, I'm going to constantly have the same prospects of selling or not selling. We benefit from the contracts being smart, and the traditional contracts like debt are not only inefficient, but they become worse after faster learning. Okay? And as I have about 5 minutes, of course, this paper relates to the literature on blockchain and smart contracts, which can be analyzed from different angles. It relates to the classical theories about external financing and moral hazard. And it is about thinking of how the frictions are changing because of the new environment. So just to give you a flavor how the model roughly looks like without going through the details and just giving a hint how it can be solved, we can assume that there is some risk-neutral firm which wants to maximize profits as well as capability of getting external financing. Okay, so from the optimal contract point of view, we can take it from two ways. We can ask what would give the highest returns to the investors, keeping the firm equally well off, or more classical approach to be asking that keeping investors happy. What is possible to what range of investment costs can be financed. So what is there is going to be the optimal contract. Every period the firm can decide whether to make an effort or not. There will be any number of periods. If the firm makes an effort, then they will have some chance of making a sale, 0-1. If they don't make an effort, then they will not make a sale for sure. Okay, the effort is not contractable, and lenders must break even. So what is kind of nice in this setting, because of this kind of binary structure, ways one can consider pretty much any distribution of the potential sales. So whatever is driving the demand. I don't need things to be IID. I don't necessarily need the examples that I was telling before, that if I sell something, I'm going to become more optimistic. It goes the other way around. And in most cases, except the special case of independent sales, we have some learning from the data when we want to adjust it. Then there is a classical kind of contracting problem where the borrower is offering some functions that depends on the realized outcomes. We want to encourage effort. And what turns out to be mattering a lot is that whether informational environment is in a style that I was describing before, one can call it success raises prospects, or technically it's a distributions that are stochastically affiliated, in which case when I'm selling something, I'm gonna find it easier to sell in the future. So this is likely for startups who have a large target market. They have consumer preferences. When some of them are liking the product, I'm going to think that others like it as well. When it is a firm with network effects, innovative gadget, so many startups could fall here. Some cases, maybe exclusive design items, products that can be easy to copy are only temporary. It could be the case that having good outcomes is making it harder for me to continue selling. So think of, for example, a theater with fixed number of seats. Of course, I'm happy if I'm having sold half of the seats, but if I know there are only so many people that can come there, if I have already filled half of the rooms, and findings also 50% is increasingly difficult, so it is changing things. And one way the way it can be solved is effectively using the duality theorems, which is kind of benefiting from the equivalence that we can maximize funds available to the firm, subject to everybody having incentives to make effort every period and having non-negative payments. So we can equivalently maximize the shadow prices of it, which is essentially simpler to solve problem. In either case, we can find that the optimal contract, so if I have the two periods here, can be expressed exactly like this dynamically adjusting profit sharing rule, when we have some initial fraction of the first sales that we are promising to the entrepreneur, and then what they are keeping in the second period depends on the outcome of the first period. And things can depend on also if the effort changes over time, but otherwise it's gonna be typically not constant over time. So the same logic kind of extends to whichever number of periods that we have. And I guess that again, under the limited time, it is nicest to maybe illustrate like how the optimal contract with more periods could look like in this case under this different informational environment. So this is just one possible path of sales. So at date 1, despite the best efforts, this firm did not manage to sell everything. Then they sold something, then they didn't sell things, then they sold again. So these are what green dots mean. In which case we can see that the borrower's expectations would be changing. So like they start, let's say like with 50-50, but if they didn't sell, they become kind of rationally more pessimistic. When they sell, they become more optimistic. So it is like that. And the way that the optimal contract in this case would look like under constant effort would be that effectively we would like have the borrower having like a trickling down like share. So they would start by having like a claim of a big proportion of the first sale. Whenever this happens, every time they sell, the claim for the next sale that they get is gonna get lower. All right. In this environment, why does a contract look like that? Well, first we need to compensate for the effort. So this is a green area here. So there are some set of periods. Okay. So when the entrepreneur is getting more pessimistic, so didn't sell in the date 1, we would want to give them a bigger share in order to maintain their effort incentives. If when they save, they are easier to incentivize. So this is this green area. Additionally, we need to like compensate for them for the information rents, which is like the idea that, well, we don't also want the entrepreneur to purposefully not make an effort to have better contractual terms, and that is requiring them to still like get some further compensation. Things are even super much nicer in the case of when success is lowering prospects. Okay, same sort of sales path. Expectations now goes the other way around, that if I don't sell, I'm a bit unhappy, but now it is easier for me to find new customers. So the expectations are just like that, and the only thing we need to do is to just compensate the entrepreneur for the effort cost rather than this information rents. Right? So this overall is telling that indeed like the optimal contract benefits from adjusting over time. And maybe like as a final thing here, again a little numerical example that is illustrating like what happens to different contracts and like accessibility to financing. So in this case, like the own investments that is needed or like which projects can be financed is higher when there are like more friction. So ideally we would want everything to be at 0. And what we can see it is also the difference between the orange bar when we are making frequently decisions about effort, and the blue bars where we are making infrequently decisions about the effort. And we can see the following things. In the IID sales, like optimal contract is pretty much simple equity, but it is still like debt is getting like worse. So more frequently we are making decisions. It's not only the same, but it's getting worse. On the success lowest prospects, we could achieve like all investments being coverable under optimal contract. Neither equity or debt is optimal, and again, more frequent decisions makes them worse. And in these environments that I used in my first example, it's the same sort of pattern. We still need some own investments, like we can't totally cover like all possible investments, but this optimal contract is better than equity, and equity in turn is better than debt, and more frequent decisions makes a problem bigger. Okay? So overall, the conclusion of the paper is that when we have like this digital ledger technologies, maybe it's worth thinking of new types of financing contracts that can react on incoming data, because the reason why we haven't been so stuck with debt contracts is because that minimizes the need for costly verification, which is exactly the sort of things that the digital ledger technologies are supposed to be able to mitigate. So the problem is not only about the fact that these optimal contracts can be fun, but like when we have these frequent effort decisions and faster learning from data, then like the classical contracts can become even worse. And it is in kind of flexible information environment, in general, better to have equity-like contracts, and we can do even better than equity with contracts that adjust to data. All right, so thank you.